What is the 20th National Congress, and why is it important that Xi Jinping secures a third term? We explore the key Communist Party event and talk about what happens when the totalitarian leader retains power or is removed from power. Today, I speak with Roger Garside, author of China Coup, on these questions. Welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. China will hold what is called the 20th Party Congress this fall, where representatives show up in Beijing and pretend they casted a democratic vote to choose the next top leader. In reality, all that is nothing but a formality. What the Congress wants to accomplish is really simple. Current leader Xi Jinping, the communist leader, will attempt to stay in power and get a third term, something unprecedented. Meanwhile, his opponents will try to bring in someone new. Perhaps it's the second in command, Li Keqiang, the current sitting premier of China, who is set to retire if he does not become the next leader. This 20th Congress marks the most pivotal moment in the Communist Party history, as we could see the totalitarian reign of Xi Jinping continue or end. At the same time, it is also the most challenging period leading up to it, as various news media inside and outside of China begin to spread information about Xi's health, his control of power, the infighting among factions, and so forth. To us, it matters only as important as how China as a whole moves forward. As we know, the current communist regime offers nothing positive to the global environment. From bringing COVID-19 to the world, to the economic warfare against various countries like Australia, Lithuania, and the United States, to the technology and intellectual property thefts around the world, what we desire is a systemic reform of China's ruling party. And even if they choose someone else, the communist system could still be intact, and then we don't accomplish what we want to see. But still, it's very worthy to know what goes on inside the Communist Party as they brawl over who gets to control 1.4 billion people and its assets, and what the next steps of war against the West could entail. So how exactly does one become top leader inside the Chinese Communist Party? To break it simply, the top leader is decided by a council-like committee called the Politburo Standing Committee. And he is also a sitting member on the committee. Now, there are currently 7 members in this iteration of the committee, but it could be expanded to more members. These 7 members represent the various factions or balance of power of the Communist Party itself. The next leader is chosen after closed-door negotiations amongst the factions. Xi Jinping holds the current paramount power. But because he has effectively ruined China's economy through the zero COVID measures and the image of China through, say, supporting Putin and Russia, the oppositions are trying to use everything possible to kick him out through his mistakes that has brought the CCP down. While Xi Jinping himself will attempt to use all means to justify his actions and attempt to become the next chairman of the CCP, which in theory is a position above even his current title, the General Secretary. So that means if Xi Jinping gives up power, his status as the Secretary or the General Secretary could just mean that he still has the final say as the chairman, even if on paper he is no longer the leader of the Communist Party, and that would mean that something like a Mao Zedong status for Xi Jinping. But things could also get ugly leading up to the Congress, as Xi might need to compromise with other factions to balance powers and to concede on errors he made, namely COVID, the economy, and the international relations. To understand this all and a bit more, I'm joined by Roger Garside, author of the China Coup and a former diplomat in Beijing. We know that zero COVID is the most controversial one, not just around the world, but in China as well. What has happened in Shanghai, around the country, what do you think that model has done to the authority of Xi Jinping?
Well, he proclaimed his zero COVID strategy as a demonstration of the superiority of China's political and economic system. But it's proving to be just the opposite of that. At a time when the rest of the world is learning to live with COVID-19 as an endemic sickness, China is isolated. Why? Because his combination of mass lockdowns, which prevented the emergence of herd immunity, second-rate Chinese vaccines, refusal to import first-class effective foreign vaccines, lack of vaccination, shortage of vaccination amongst the elderly. All these combined together have produced a very vulnerable state in China, and an imperative to isolate China from the rest of the world. And internally, it's aroused, as we've seen on videos from Shanghai and elsewhere, anger, indignation, and an erosion of respect and loyalty to the Communist Party.
And we also, in the book, you talked about the economics of China a lot. For the first time, we're hearing now that the U.S.'s economic growth actually surpassed China for the first time, I think, since the 70s. What do you think is the current status of the Chinese economy, knowing that zero COVID has essentially shut the country down, especially like cities like Shanghai?
Yes, I mean, some 40 cities across the country, accounting for 30% of GDP, are in some degree of lockdown, either total, as Shanghai has been, or partial. And that has had a very serious effect on the economy. But this came against a background of disastrous performance in the property sector. And we've seen default of major property developers. Home sales are down, home starts are down 42%. Land sales, which local governments rely upon for 50% of their revenues, land sales are down by 38% at the last reading. Unemployment in big cities is up. So a lot of short-term and long-term damage.
Let's talk about the party infighting here. Xi Jinping's power, how secure is he right now for a third term, or how unsecure is he?
Well, there's obviously no sign of a direct challenge. If anyone was planning to make a direct challenge to him, they wouldn't advertise that in advance, of course. But what I think quite a lot of commentators are coming around to say is that while he may get his third term, he may not get it on the terms that he would like. He may be forced to compromise with his opponents within the leadership. He may be forced to accept people that he would rather not have in the standing committee of the Politburo. He may be forced to give them a place, and what may come out of this party congress is a Xi Jinping who is visibly less number one to the same degree that he has claimed that spot up to now.